Who's heard that term in the last 6 years? Right? Right. Now, had you heard that term in the 80s or 90s? I hadn't. What are sleeper cells? Stalin said sleeper cells are capitalist agents, meaning us, capitalist terrorists, who were dressing like Soviet citizens, acting like Soviet citizens, hiding among good Soviet citizens sneakily, waiting for the moment, perhaps for years, when at a signal they would rise up and create anti-Soviet terrorist mayhem, right? So this was a hyped threat, didn't exist. It's a narrative that recurs, and what you'll see in what I'm sharing with you is that it's almost like someone in the Bush administration has gone back and seen what worked and just basically lifted those images, that language. Homeland, Heimat, right? Embedding of journalists. Goebbels pioneered the embedding of journalists. Leni Riefenstahl was embedded with troops going into Poland. Take a look at Mission Accomplished and take a look at the scene in Triumph of the Will where the Fuhrer is descending in a plane and greeted by his uniformed staffers, and he says, we need your support in accomplishing our mission. So many echoes. I mean, I started feeling this feeling of deja vu when I was like, okay, people are burning Dixie Chicks CDs. CDs don't burn. They like emit toxic smoke. Why is this so familiar? And of course, Goebbels in 1933 staged spontaneous gatherings of students where they burned books. And again you see these echoes. So Stalin's was a hyped threat, but Pinochet told Chileans in 1973 about a real threat. There were really armed insurgents, but then he hyped it with fake documents, which is something despots often do. And remember, we saw fake documents when the White House showed the yellow cake documents, that there's a whole book saying everyone's like, no, they're fake, they're fake. But they said, oh, Niger is buying uranium. Iraq is buying uranium from Niger. We can't wait for the smoking gun to come in the form of a mushroom cloud. And so we were duped into invading Iraq. So similarly, Pinochet held up what he called Plan Z, fake documents that purported to show that these armed insurgents were going to blow up all this infrastructure and assassinate all these leaders at once. Fake, but it terrified Chilean citizens so that they didn't fight hard for their democracy when the coup was attempted. The second thing a would-be despot always does is to create a secret prison system where torture takes place that is outside the rule of law. And very often, they will also establish military tribunals that strip prisoners of due process. Again, Lenin was the innovator this time, but Mussolini studied Lenin and developed his system called Confino. Hitler studied Stalin and developed the People's Court system. I beg your pardon, Hitler studied Mussolini with the People's Court system, and Stalin studied Hitler. And so what happens when you have a military tribunal system and a secret prison system outside the rule of law where torture takes place is that it starts to put pressure on the rest of civil society. And I'll tell you how. Now, this is really difficult. But this is like, I've started to offer $50,000 for anyone who can do this, even though I don't happen to have $50,000 handy. But I invite you to name a society that created a secret prison system outside the rule of law where torture takes place that didn't sooner or later turn the abuse against its own citizens. So why should we worry about the fact that brown people with Muslim names on this far-off island are being tortured? The White House says we don't torture. It's a lie. They're being tortured systemically. People in U.S.-held prisons in Iraq are being tortured. People at black sites are being tortured. Why should it bother us? My brother's a really decent guy, but he said, that's not my issue before he read my argument. And so apart from the moral issue, why should we worry that the state has legalized torture? The reason we should worry is that in what I call a fascist shift, and I use that term very conservatively, I use it technically, not rhetorically. There are many definitions of fascism. my dictionary definition is when the state starts to use terror against the individual in an effort to push back democracy. So we should worry about the fact that the state has essentially legalized torture of these marginal people, people who are marginal to us, because what always happens in a fascist shift is that the state will start by abusing people that no one in the mainstream really identifies with much. You know, in Germany, it was anarchists, communists, homosexuals, Jews, gypsies, thank you. And then what always happens is there's a blurring of the line, and the noose starts to catch up more and more members of civil society, mainstream society, and it's always the same cast of characters. Us, basically. Journalists, editors, opposition leaders, labor leaders, and outspoken clergy. So and Germany is so instructive in this regard because, people don't realize that it didn't start with crematoria. That what happens when you create a secret prison system where torture takes place is it always metastasizes. It starts out little and informal and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And like in Berlin in 1931, 1932, torture was still illegal. The Nazis weren't even in power. They were a minority party. It was still a democracy. There were opposition. There were marches. There was, everything was as it should have been. But the SA, a paramilitary force, we'll get to that, started to create these makeshift torture cellars where they would torment these marginal people. And everyone knew about it. They thought it was funny. There were cartoons about it in the German press. It's like, that show 24. It's like, that's funny. Everyone accepted it. But then it doesn't take too long before the line starts to be blurred. So why is this so urgently relevant to us? Most Americans don't realize that the president now claims the power to say to any one of us, what's your name? Raul, you're an enemy combatant. Or let's find someone who really looks like a soccer mom, a Republican soccer mom, okay? Republican, you have a really nice purse. Republican soccer mom. Yes, yes. Pardon me? Anne, enemy combatant. No, it doesn't matter. You can be innocent. You can be Republican. You can be a devoted, evangelical. It doesn't matter. Enemy combatant is a status offense. Your innocence does not protect you. Your party affiliation does not protect you. And if he says, and Naomi, enemy combatant, it's like Mother May I. If he, on his say-so alone, he can name you or me an enemy combatant, and they can't torture us yet, but they can take us to a Navy brig to a 10 by 12-foot cell and keep us in American citizens, innocent American citizens, in solitary confinement for up to 3 years, making it difficult for us to see our families, to contact our lawyers, difficult to have charges filed, okay? That's what they did to Jose Padilla. Now, he was not so great, but they can do it to any one of us. Now, what psychiatrists know is that prolonged isolation, solitary confinement, makes healthy, sane people insane. So we're at this kind of incredibly fragile moment because democracies don't close down like that in a kind of steady progressive line. They close down more in what Malcolm Gladwell would call a series of tipping points. And so, and then there reaches a point at which democracy can no longer heal democracy. But that point comes really fast when it comes. So the first time that the state made it legal to torture people, that was one of those vertical lines. And, the first time that this kid was tasered in Florida, I think that was one of those vertical lines. I was not surprised to find that he was tasered at the University of Florida. I know, it's not appropriate for kids. I'm sorry. It's not. I know. I don't let my daughter listen. I don't. It's like she has to watch America's Next Top Model off the record. The daughter of the beauty myth does watch America's Next Top Model, the beauty myth author. But when this kid was tasered, I wasn't surprised to learn, because I was reading Goebbels, that it took place at the University of Florida, which is answerable to the Board of Regents, which is answerable to the state legislature, which has close ties to Jeb Bush. because Goebbels pioneered this practice of using state legislatures